Welcome to Lesson 23 in our Saxon Math series. If you're following along in your math book, Lesson 23 begins on page 96. And today we have lots of vocabulary to learn about geometry, lines, segments, rays, and angles. So scrolling down on page 96 past the warm-up, let's look at the new concept. The first new vocabulary term that I'm going to highlight right here is line. And a line goes on and on. And when we draw a line, we include an arrowhead on each end to show that the line continues in both directions. We can't obviously draw a line that goes on forever and ever and ever, but we can represent that happening with the arrowheads on either end. So this is a line. If you see the arrowheads on both ends, that's a line. However, you can take just a small portion of the line. For instance, what if I just cut out that part? Well, then that would become a line segment. And a line segment does not include arrowheads. It, however, has end points. These are points that go on the end. That's how we call them endpoints. So complicated, right? And finally, we can take this part of a line from a center section and go to the end like that. If you did that, if you cut that part of the line, then you would have something called a ray, R-A-Y, a ray. And the ray begins at a point, there's an endpoint, and it continues on in one direction without end. And you know it continues without end because the other end has not an endpoint, but an arrowhead. Okay, so line segment, sometimes just called segment, and ray. All right, let's go to the next page. There's more math terms to learn. Now you can have multiple lines and they have special relationships. Lines and segments that go in the same direction but stay the same distance apart are called parallel lines. And it kind of looks like the two L's right here in parallel. Notice how they go in the same direction, but they stay the same distance apart. That's how I remember parallel means lines going in the same direction but also staying the same distance apart. And they can go in horizontal directions, oblique directions, vertical directions. It can be lines, it can be segments, but that's parallel. The next term, sometimes lines or segments cross and we say they intersect. And it's kind of like when two roads meet, where they meet is called the intersection. And they can cross at any degree of angle. And it can be lines that cross or intersect or segments that cross and intersect. Sometimes there's a special kind of intersection that forms a square corner. And these lines are called, they intersect, but they're called perpendicular lines. And perpendicular lines form, let me use a pen for this, form this perfect square, just like that. They can also be tilted, but that's still a perfect square right there. And the vocabulary continues down here at the bottom because angles are formed where lines or segments intersect. So you see we have an angle forming right here. Angles forming here. There's lots of angles. Let me erase that and show you how many angles there are right here in just this one intersection alone. There's one angle, two angles, and we draw that kind of half circle to show an angle, three angles, and four angles. There are four angles right there where those two lines intersect. And where an angle meets another, or where I should say where a line or a segment meets, that's called the vertex. Let me draw a red dot right there. Can you see that? Let me extend the page down a little bit. The vertex right here, vertex. The vertex is this point right here where these two segments meet. Okay, sometimes called the corner, but in math and geometry, it's officially called the vertex. All right, more math terms to follow. Let me go to the next page. What happened to it? I don't know what happened to it. Let me scroll down and see. Well, that's disappointing, isn't it? There we go. 99, 98. There it is. An angle is named by how open it is. So now we have a bunch of angle terms. There's all different kinds of angles. Let's talk about a right angle. A right angle is an angle like the corner of a square. One line horizontal, one line vertical. That's called a right angle. It can be inside a shape like this square, or it can just be an angle. And to show that an angle is a right angle, we draw a small little square right here, just like that. If you see that, it's trying to tell you that this is a right angle. Now, not all angles are right angles. Some angles are very small. They're called acute angles. They're very small, and I remember that because a baby is real small and it's a cute baby. So an acute angle is very small. It doesn't have a perfect square corner as its vertex. Some angles are very large, and they're called obtuse angles. They're larger than right angles. So acute, obtuse, and right angles, those are three terms you'll need to know as well. And finally, let's talk about triangles, specifically a right triangle. You want to draw a triangle that has one right angle? Well, what you would do is you would begin by drawing two line segments that form a right angle, and then you would just connect those two lines together, starting at this point and working your way down to the other one. That's called a right triangle. So we had a lot of math terms that we learned today in lesson 23, but I would encourage you to practice your power picks and gestures, and pretty soon you'll have all of them mastered. Okay? Good luck.